Sleep is often treated as a luxury, something we sacrifice in the name of productivity, performance, or just getting through the day. In today's episode, I'm joined by Ellie Walsh, a researcher in clinical neuropsychology specializing in sleep, circadian rhythms, and their impact on mental health and performance in athletes. Ellie's work sits at the intersection of brain science, behavior, and performance. She's contributed to research published in leading journal articles, including Sports Medicine. She's also presented her work globally, with a focus on translating complex science into practical, real-world strategies. In this conversation, we break down what the research is actually showing, not just about how long you sleep, but how consistent your sleep is, how aligned it is with your biology, and how that directly impacts your mood, energy, and mental resilience. From research and expert insights to realistic actions to improve how you feel and perform, welcome to Elevate Wellness with Santosha. I am really grateful that you are choosing this episode to tune into. I hope that you can benefit from the insights of this conversation and that they improve your life in some way. I have a question before we get into it. If you could take 10 seconds to help someone out, it wouldn't cost you anything but those 10 seconds. Would you do it? If you answered yes, I would truly appreciate if you could take a moment to click follow wherever you're listening. It makes a big difference in supporting the podcast to continue delivering as much value as possible throughout these conversations. Ellie, what initially drew you into clinical neuropsychology, and at what point did sleep and circadian rhythms become the focus of your work?
Yeah, okay. So what drew me to neuropsych? I went through a bit of an unconventional pathway into neuropsych. So a lot of people, when they get into that course and that profession, it's usually because you've done an undergraduate degree and you do a course in neuroscience and neuropsychology and you find it quite interesting and you decide to go down that trajectory. I went into this degree and this professional pathway with the overall intention of doing neuropsych. So I always have to remind myself that this was my choice. Every time I'm complaining about how much work I have to do, it was like my purpose and my pathway. And like most people who get into any sort of neuro degree, I was really interested in how the brain worked. But more specifically, in terms of my interests, is I was really interested in how something like adversity, because we all experience adversity in our lives, how that might impact the brain and how that then impacts behavior and thus performance. So let's just say concussion or any other brain injury, how that affects different parts of the brain, how that might impact someone's sport performance, and then there's a negative feedback loop. And while it's in neuropsych, it's traditionally quite a biomedical model where we take a bit of a deficit-based approach in terms of there's a problem and we're trying to make that problem better. The lens I wanted to see it with was how do we make that feedback loop more adaptive? So taking more of a positivist optimization approach to that loop, where if we intervene earlier on in terms of how do we actually change those neural pathways in terms of seeing that adversity as something that we can benefit from. So yeah, that's the reason why I got into it. And then as a adolescent, a child, I was quite interested in sports. So naturally, that's a pathway I wanted to get into. I did my honors degree, so my honors undergrad, my thesis in looking at how different psychological factors impacted pain after a sport injury. Got really into research, wanted to keep that alongside the profession I went down. So I found Monash University in Victoria, and they were doing a combined PhD master's program. So you do a PhD and you specialize in whatever research topic you pick. And then you're also doing the clinical degree alongside of it. And I actually found my main supervisor. So on a podcast at the time, I was listening to a podcast on sports, and she had done her PhD in the UK, and she was a chronobiologist. And right at the time that I was searching for a supervisor, she was working with the AFL in Victoria and working on how you can utilize sleep and circadian rhythms and the optimization of that in order to improve performance. So yeah, I reached out to her, we clicked, and 4 years later, here I am, almost a PhD done. So that's kind of how I got into it. Clinical neuropsych, I've always been interested. Sleep, again, I used to wear a Whoop. It's a wearable device in my undergrad. Always loved sleep, but circadian rhythms kind of fell into my lap.
That's incredible. And sleep has such a huge impact on everything else in our lives. And I think, especially in the space of athletes, where it's so critical to performance.
Yeah. All the different stages. It's super important, which I'm sure we'll get into. But there are stages during the sleep where we have growth hormone that's secreted, and basically, if you've gone and done a 3-hour session at the gym, or if you've trained on the field and you don't get that good sleep, you're not getting any of the benefits from it.
Yeah, I have heard that if you are in a position where you have to choose between like training really early or really late, but it's going to be compromising your sleep, then you should optimize, like, rather choose better sleep or like longer sleep.
Yeah. Timing of exercise definitely plays into that. So there has been research out there on actual timing and dosage of exercise. So we know that late night exercise, the more intense it is, the closer to your sleep can impact your actual sleep quality. And then depending on whether or not you are someone who is more of an early person or a late person, your ability to actually perform much better in your training session is going to be different based off your different genetic predispositions. And also society plays a really important role. So a lot of us
Mm.
have to go to work at a certain time. So just fitting in a small amount of exercise is better. But yeah, if you can maybe cut that session a little bit shorter, so 45 minutes instead of an hour, and be able to get that extra 15 minutes of sleep. Yeah, it's a bit
Yeah.
of a, I guess, pros versus the cons
Yeah.
scenario.
So, for someone hearing this for the first time, how would you explain what clinical psychology actually is and how it differs from general psychology, especially in the context of performance and mental health?
Clinical psych or clinical neuropsych?
Clinical neuropsych versus psychology.
Yeah,
Wait, clinical neuropsych and clinical psych.
are
Is there a
different.
there's a big difference?
There is a bit of a difference. It's quite funny. I actually had a client this morning who said, "Why is it that you medical professionals have to put neuro in front of everything?" He's like, "You just make things overly complicated." I
And you're
go,
like, "There's actually a big difference."
I agree. Any job position with more than 7 syllables, like you would think they were a little bit egotistical. They just really like the sound of themselves. And I would say that I would agree if we weren't psychologists first and we do more listening.
Yeah. So, what is the difference then between the clinical neuropsych and clinical psych?
Yeah. A lot of phonemes. So I think the biggest difference would be that a neuropsych is a psychologist first, but we have specialty training in understanding brain behavior relationships, just simply put. And we, within the profession, I think we would resonate more with the label of being more of a brain detective than a therapist itself. Even though we do therapy, a lot of our role has to do with understanding how different conditions might affect the brain. and how that might manifest in terms of your cognition, so your thinking, emotions, behavior, and then your overall functioning in society and in your everyday life.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
what we do is we have a number of different tools that we use, so a number of different assessment tools. These can be pencil paper tasks, puzzles, and we usually come with our big cases of tools. And what we can do is we can assess whether or not the brain is working well or not working well. And with that information, alongside maybe medical reports, a clinical interview with the client or family, um, we can either make a diagnosis if we think it's appropriate. We can inform a diagnosis, so confirm or deny. And usually, this is the case where brain imaging may not be sensitive or specific enough to determine whether or not a condition can be confirmed or
Really?
denied. Yeah,
Brain imaging.
yeah.
I thought that was like the top standard.
It is for many conditions, but a lot of conditions, sometimes you'll come in and the brain imaging isn't clear enough. And usually
Mhm.
these are the beginning stages of different illnesses. So let's just say in the case of dementia. So you might have a vascular dementia. Someone's noticing changes in their thinking, which is one of the first outcomes. And we're not seeing it on brain imaging, or it's just not very clear. There might be a few white dots in someone's brain, and we're allowed to have white dots in our brain. I think we have, once we get to 50, we're allowed 2 every decade. Um,
Wow.
this obviously increases based off your lifestyle habits. So if you don't eat very well, if you've got high cholesterol, if you smoke, there's a lot of risk factors. But if we're seeing like a few white dots, but not enough to say that, yes, they definitely have vascular dementia, we might get brought in as neuropsychs, and we can test their thinking and determine what's working well and what's not working well. And based off that pattern of their thinking, we can just help inform the diagnosis. So
Yeah.
we can be useful in terms of a second opinion in that medical space. We're also utilized in decision-making capacity decisions. So with some conditions, this can affect your ability to make decisions, and
Yeah.
we've got the power to actually revoke those decisions. It's not my favorite thing to do, especially when you have to tell someone, actually, you don't have the ability to make decisions anymore.
That would be tough.
Yeah, because right now, your decision-making is impaired.
Wow. So like dementia.
Yeah. Or really severe psychiatric illnesses. So people in a manic episode, for example, can sometimes not have the ability to make decisions. And all of this is for the welfare of that person,
Mm.
because we don't want them to make a decision that's going to ultimately,
Be harmful.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So at what episode did you say?
So this is a bit of an example. This is not always the case, but sometimes when someone is in a manic episode, they
A
have
manic episode. Yeah.
bipolar, then they might be in the hospital because of a circumstance, and the query gets brought up whether or not they have the ability to make decisions at this point in time. So this is also temporary. So we can temporarily revoke your ability to make decisions, and then we say like it is temporary. Once the episode has been resolved, then you might be able to make those decisions again. But in other cases, like neurodegenerative conditions such as Huntington's, for example, we know that these clients also, they just become worse. They're not going to get any better. And sometimes taking that decision away is going to be permanent. So yeah, not my favorite thing to do, but from, I guess, more optimization point of view, another role of ours is actually coming up and creating strategies to help that thinking for the person. And we can work with them over time to improve their thinking. So that can be intrinsically putting things in place internally, putting focus blocks, giving yourself fatigue breaks to improve your attention. Or it can be externally, so utilizing environmental modifications, external aids to actually externalize your thinking issues and just make life easier for you.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, so lots of different roles and places you can get into with neuropsych, which is what I love about it. It's very, very diverse. And I think your original question was around where mental health might play into it. It's we really, as neuropsychologists, we need to understand the impact mental health has on someone's thinking. So yes, different mental health conditions can show different patterns in thinking. So usually, people have issues with taking in information, and thus you might see that in terms of memory issues. They have issues with decision making, rational thinking, but also it's how something like anxiety, for example, might impact your performance on testing. So
Yeah.
let's go back to the vascular dementia example. I've got someone in their mid 50s. They're quite worried about dementia. I mean, that's very reasonable. Maybe their parent had a dementia and they've noticed that they're having thinking problems at work. And we probably hear that with our parents all the time. I have dementia. I always forget where I put my keys are. Um, so they'll come in and naturally they're really anxious because this test is going to determine whether or not, it might determine whether or not I give them the diagnosis. So on testing, we might see this pattern where their memory is actually quite poor. But if they come in really anxious, their attention is focused inwards. So it's focused internally, it's not focused externally. And they were actually not able to take in any of the information in the first place. Therefore, they're not going to be able to recall it. So if I just took that test on face value, I would go, hey, look, they're forgetting. They've got a memory issue. And then you can just cause a whole cascade of problems, misdiagnosis, you're just creating unnecessary worry. So just being aware of how uh, factors such as anxiety, low mood, even fatigue and poor sleep, how that might play into someone's ability to actually perform to the best of their ability on testing.
Yeah, that is an incredible field of study.
Yeah, it's it's incredible. It's a lot of study. Like I'm getting to the end. I see the light at the end of the tunnel. But it's a lot. It's a long process, but as it should be. You've got an important role, and you need to be able to play that role and play it well. And ultimately, it's about changing people's lives. So you gotta be mindful of that.
Yeah,
So.
it is a huge change,
Mm.
especially that like taking a decision away or supporting someone in their mental health journey or you know, anything to do with the brain is super, super vital that you have appropriate help from someone who is highly qualified.
Exactly.
I'm curious on the white dots in the brain. What are the white dots caused by?
Yeah, so we can briefly go into. So we have these dots in the brain, and what it's caused by is one, aging. Unfortunately, as we age, we are going to get more of these white dots. So it's going to be a byproduct of aging. It's also caused by different lifestyle choices we take. So this will start from early developmental ages. And once you start smoking, that's an increased chance of white dots. Once you start drinking, again, greater chance. If you have, and this one can also lead to a higher risk of cardiovascular issues. So stroke, for example, or um, blood clots or any issues with the heart can also affect the brain. So those are kind of how we describe the white dots. And what the white dots do is it just makes it a lot more inefficient. So the way I describe it in a clinical setting is your brain it's making these connections, right, from one side of the brain to the next side of the brain. And the way we kind of conceptualize these connections as highways. So I've maybe got to go to Brisbane. And so my highway, if there's no traffic, it's 110 kilometers. But with those white dots, what's happening is there is construction on the road. So even though it used to be 110 kilometers, right now it's actually gone down to 80 kilometers. So it's still able to get you from destination A to destination B. You're just going at a much slower rate.
Yeah.
But the good thing about this is it is somewhat reversible, or we can actually slow down that progression. So in a way, we can kind of speed up the construction if we're keeping to the analogy. And a way to do that is good sleep, good diet. It's all of our foundations of health. It is get your exercise. Exercise, there's a, can't remember which scientist said this, but she's a brilliant scientist in memory, and she speaks about how exercise can actually give you a really fluffy hippocampus. A fluffy hippocampus. I say my mom probably has the fluffiest hippocampus. She exercises all the time. But this really helps with memory. It releases a brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is just really useful for memory. So exercise is great. So if you're able to implement these, even in middle age, you can really increase the construction and reduce your chance of getting more white dots. And the more white dots you have, the higher risk you have of dementias.
Yeah. And from a physiological perspective, are the white dots to do with I don't know, calcification of the myelin sheath, or do you know exactly what is do you know what is going on behind it?
Yeah, it's just, I hate saying this, but it's like little strokes in the brain, really. Just little strokes of blood loss in the brain. That's what's going on.
Wow. I'm gonna keep living a good, healthy life. So
you get your exercise, have good sleep, eat well, socialize, keep your brain active.
it's all the things that we're told to do.
Yeah,
hey,
all the foundations of health.
Yeah. So getting back to sleep, a lot of people think that sleep is a passive recovery, but based on your research, how should we actually be thinking about sleep when it comes to mental health, including mood and also to performance?
Yeah, sleep is definitely not a passive process. It is a multi-stage active process of recovery and emotional regulation. And the way the sleep world, with the way in which we divide sleep, is we divide it into REM and non-REM sleep. So REM is rapid eye movement, and non-REM sleep is made up of 3 beginning stages. We've got our stage 1, that is the stage where, let's just say you are in a lecture, it's pretty boring, might be me speaking, and you're dozing off. And that little jolt you get if you hear a noise, that might be you in light sleep. So that's what's going on. It's going into your stage 2. So you're not quite there yet. It's like the verge, the transition. Then we'll go into stage 2 sleep, and that's what people classify as light sleep, but that's just normal sleep. We spend half of our night, our typical night sleep, in this stage 2 sleep. And then all of these stages have a purpose. There's a role for all of these stages. And then we'll transition into stage 3 sleep. That's deep sleep. And the reason for that is on our electrical EEG, our brain waves, when we look at the activity, is it's quite a synchronized wave. And there's a lot of functions that go on in stage 3 sleep. It's very important. It's that release of the growth hormone that helps you recover. It goes through this synaptic pruning process. So, for example, we take in so much information throughout the day, and it's a way for your brain to kind of sort out and go, all right, we need to make these connections stronger. I'm going to strengthen these connections, but these connections we can throw away. We can get rid of. It's not important. And that could be just the color of this rug here. Maybe that wasn't very important to me, even though I took it in, I sensed it. It's probably not going to be very important to me tomorrow or in a week's time. However, now that I've said this, I'm going to really remember what your rug looks like. Come back to me. It's going to strengthen these connections now that I've actually focused on it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on in this stage of sleep. And also we've got these cytokines that get released, and that's really useful for improving our immune function. Yeah, so stage 3, super important. And then we get into our REM sleep. So that's stage 4. We usually do most of our REM at the very end of our night, so our beginning of our morning for a lot of people. And that sleep is really characterized by, we have these vivid dreams, our body is paralyzed, and our brain is super awake. So it's super aroused during this time. And a lot of it, the hypotheses around it, is it's really to do with the emotional processing of memories. So how do we actually process information from the day, memories from the day, and make sense of them? So there's obviously many other roles within those 4 stages, but that's just a little bit of a snapshot of what's going on and how it might kind of play into mood and mental health. Is sleep and mental health have this really unique bidirectional relationship. So one affects the other, and we see that relationship on both sides, where poor sleep can lead to a range of mental health conditions. And there's a lot of mechanisms that can explain that. But we also see, if you look at something like the DSM, so the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Health Conditions, almost all of the symptoms across every single mental health condition has sleep disturbance as one of the, what we call transdiagnostic symptomology. So something that is across every single condition. We see sleep disturbances, depression, anxiety, bipolar, OCD, all of it comes with sleep disturbances.
Wow.
And in psychiatry, when we think about how we might target these symptoms across all treatments, we look for these transdiagnostic indicators. So sleep is one of these aspects and one of these symptoms. And we know from intervention research that when we actually improve sleep, so if we improve their sleep quality, we see a dose-response relationship. The more we improve their sleep quality, the greater reduction we have in symptoms such as depression, anxiety, and stress. And like I said, many mechanisms around that. One of them can be going back to the REM, the emotional processing of the brain. What happens is, if we're not able to process those emotions very well, what can happen is you have a really dysregulated emotional system. So I guess what's happening as well during that period is we have a part of our brain called the locus coeruleum that is quite dormant during that time. And therefore, it stopped the production of noradrenaline, which is a stress hormone. And what happens is, during this REM sleep, we can process maybe a stressful event from the day. So let's just say our boss got quite mad at us because we made a mistake at work. We're able to process it. We're able to process it without the stress reactivity, without freaking out as we might do in our waking state. And then the next day, it's actually, something that was terrible yesterday is maybe not so bad today because we are able to process it well. However, in these mental health conditions where maybe REM is reduced, such as major depression disorder, they're not able to process these emotions as well. There's many other mechanisms. Another one is the HPA axis. So sleep loss can activate our hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis in our brain, and that is responsible for the release of cortisol. So if we release cortisol, we'll release stress, we are aroused, we're heightened, and that just leads to more sleep loss. So yeah, it's this bidirectional relationship where one thing leads to the next, which leads to the next, and you get into this really negative cycle. So I think it's very fair to say that sleep is crucially important for both, again, your recovery and just your regulation of your mood. And if you sleep well, I think subjectively we all feel well the next day.
Absolutely. And in this concept of sleep is not a passive recovery, I remember hearing somewhere that, oh, your brain is like more active when you sleep than when you watch a movie. I was like, wow, movies must be really bad for you. And then I actually looked into it, and your brain is actually more active at night, typically, like when you're sleeping than when you're awake, which I thought was nuts, which must be like in this deep sleep and REM sleep in particular. But like there's so much happening when we're asleep that it just blew my mind.
Yeah.
I mean, probably not in comparison to a state when you're like let's say really heightened in the day and you need to like really use your brain to come up with solutions or that kind of thing. But the brain's incredible, and like sleep is so vital for us to function properly.
Yeah, pretty much, pretty much. Yeah, it's a really interesting aspect. I don't within my research, I'm not across all of the nuances of the sleep stages, but I do know that within REM sleep in particular, you see these really, really unusual like electrical activity in the brain, which again is very, very similar to our states of being awake. So yeah, there's so much going on, and we spend a third of our lives sleeping. We were born to sleep.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Like we go from being a child and sleeping as an infant 16 to 18 hours, and maybe it reduces as we get older. But yeah, we spend a lot of
We're
our time
designed to
sleeping.
sleep.
Might as
Yeah.
well enjoy it.
Yeah. So speaking of across your research, so one of the most interesting themes across your work is that it's not just about how long we sleep, but how regular and aligned it is. Can you explain why sleep timing matters?
Yeah. So before we get into sleep timing and why that might be important, it's probably good to set the scene and explain circadian rhythms. So sleep is driven based off two different processes. We've got the S process of sleep. So that's our homeostatic sleep drive. And the premise underlying that is really that sleep accumulates, as we are
Adenosine.
awake, energy accumulates. And then we have this release of a neurochemical called adenosine. So as adenosine builds up, that is our sleep pressure. Eventually, we are going to feel so sleepy to the point we just cark it. That's the premise under sleep pressure. But we know that when we travel, it doesn't always work out that way. So let's just say I'm flying to Europe. Doesn't matter if I traveled for the last 2, 3 days and I haven't had good sleep because I don't know how to sleep on a plane. I've got this accumulation of adenosine. And if it was just based off this S drive, I would cark it so quickly as soon as I get to the hotel bed. But sleep is also driven from another process called the circadian process, so our C drive. And that circadian process is our underlying process around of why we can't sleep when we're in a different time zone. And the whole reason around that is the circadian process dictates our sleep and wake time. And circadian rhythms is simply defined as these endogenous around 24-hour oscillations. They are our internal timekeepers. We are dictated off clock time, like in our everyday life. So we might go, okay, it's 11 o'clock. I've got an appointment at 12. Our body has evolved and adapted to the light dark cycle to base itself on its own time. So it follows its own rhythm, which is actually a little bit longer than 24 hours. So there's been experiments where if we don't have any environmental cues and we just get put in a dark room, our clock actually runs on slightly longer than 24 hours. So eventually 7 o'clock in the morning is going to become 12 o'clock in the afternoon. How we actually reset that rhythm to keep it based off 24-hour society is light. And the really unique aspect about circadian rhythms is they predict changes in the external environment. So it will help you predict what's going on in the external environment. And from an evolutionary point of view, why that might be important is let's just say if you were a rabbit and you were out there at night and you needed to be back in the burrow before it gets light and before predators come, you need to have an internal clock that's going to tell you in an hour it's going to get light, so I need to find safety. And circadian rhythms are ubiquitous in nature, so we see them across almost every single species studied on Earth. We all have a circadian rhythm, a clock, and from more complex multi-cell species like ourselves, humans, to even species that don't even live 24 hours, they all are dictated based off a clock. And with those like prediction of changes, the clearest output of our circadian rhythm is our sleep-wake behaviors. So something as simple as waking up for humans is actually quite physiologically demanding. We need our core body temperature. It's at its minimum early in the morning, and then it will slowly start to rise. Cortisol gets released. Melatonin will become suppressed as soon as we see light. Glucose might get released for energy. So there's a lot going on. And what happens is the clock will tell the body before it's time to wake up, hey, it's time for you to get ready to wake up. Let's put these physiological processes in order. And then waking up is quite nice. You know, when you sleep in on a weekend and you wake up with your natural time, it's easy to wake up. It feels good to wake up. Whilst if you wake up maybe 2 hours earlier, whether or not you have to be up early for work, whether you're trying to go to a 4:30 a.m. gym session like everyone in Queensland does, and you feel quite sick and you just need a moment, you feel a little bit dizzy when you get out of bed, it's because your circadian rhythm wasn't expecting for you to get up at that time. So yeah, when we have a dysregulated system, so when our circadian system is not able to predict the time, then it's not able to actually predict or tell your physiology what to do when you need to do it.
Yeah. So also at night, so there's such a huge process that occurs before we actually can fall asleep. And I have, through listening to many podcasts,
Love a podcast.
learned that light is a primary factor in signaling to our pituitary gland to upregulate melatonin, which then causes that sleepiness and therefore subsequently, wanting to go to bed. And I just find it so fascinating that there actually is such a long process of signaling, upregulating certain hormones, neurotransmitters, down regulating others that actually has to occur in order for this sleep cycle to commence.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and we all have our different chronotypes. So chronotypes are these genetic phenotypes, or your genetic predisposition to release your melatonin a little bit earlier in the evening or later in the evening. And in colloquially, they might be called morning larks or evening owls, night owls. And that is based off your genetics. So we've got different clock genes, clock pair 1, pair 2, and it's also based off your behaviors. So when you see light. So it is influenced by different external cues. But basically, there's so much variability within human beings. Whilst the majority of us are intermediate types, so this also changes across as we age. So kiddos are usually very early. Then you go into adolescence to your early 20s. And that's when teenagers are just on their phones late at night. And you're going, it's the technology, it's the phones, it's TikTok, it's keeping them up. Their body's actually a little bit later, so their melatonin gets released later. And it's harder for them to sleep earlier in the evening. And then you get into your more mid-20s, into maybe your mid-age, so 50s, and you become more intermediate. There's more variability into older adults, and you become earlier again. So there is a developmental change. But for the majority of us who are intermediates, let's just say, there is still a substantial amount of variability. Like, for example, the study that I looked at, we collated, maybe we had 31 participants, and there was 5 to 6 hours of variability in which their melatonin was actually released and peaked. So when we can see someone's timing of their central clock by looking at the peak of their melatonin. So when their melatonin peaks, usually will tell us maybe 2 to 3 hours. After that, that's when it's the best time to sleep. And that is what we can maybe call like that perfect optimum sleep window, because after your melatonin peaks, what happens is it will tell the melatonin is your nighttime hormone. So it's telling your body, okay, it's time for sleep. Get ready to go to sleep. So it's putting the processes in place for you to sleep. And if you sleep in line with your biology, you can fall asleep quicker. You cycle through, so your sleep is better consolidated. So you can cycle through your systems and your sleep stages more efficiently, because that's when you should be. And then you're waking up at the correct time. However, if you try and get to bed a lot earlier before your melatonin peaks, what can happen is you can induce an insomnia, because you're in bed and you're going, even though I'm sleepy, my body has not signaled that it's time for night, and I'm just going to be lying in bed, and then bed becomes stressful because I can't sleep. Then you've got another problem altogether, because you've just got the ball rolling for like bed equals stress. And that's how I start to associate sleep equals stress. Whilst on the other hand, if you miss your, I guess, optimum time for sleep, like if you are more of an early type and you don't go to bed until really late in the evening, that can also affect your sleep. So you
Yeah.
do want to be sleeping in line with your biology, but yes, um there's so much variability between everyone, between human beings, so we need to be taking that in consideration. But I think you also mentioned light, and light has a massive effect. So light is our most powerful time cue. We've got, if we think about light, I might think, okay, well, light helps me see you. Light helps me see my environment. And when we perceive light through that conceptualization, we're seeing it through our visual and perception. We've got different cells in our eyes. So we've got rods, cones, and that will help me see you. And that will go, when light hits our retina and it goes through these red rods and cones, it'll go to the back of your brain, which is your visual system. But when we speak about light and the circadian system, it goes through a different pathway. So it will target these IPGRC cells, so intrinsic photosensitive retinal ganglion cells.
Wow, that's
Well,
a mouthful, isn't it?
we love a complicated phoneme sequence in science. So we'll target these cells, which are especially sensitive to melanopsin and blue light. And that cell,
Interesting.
yeah, so that one will actually not go to the back of your brain, your visual perceptual system. It goes straight to your circadian system, where it will suppress melatonin and say, it is time for day, no longer nighttime, it is daytime. Or it can go straight to your mood circuitry. And we know that light has an alerting effect. Light can also suppress fear. So it suppresses regions in the brain which are responsible for fear. And it can also activate the front of your brain, which is responsible for decision making. So there's so many great aspects of light. But basically, this pathway is like a photon counter. It counts how many pieces of light are going into this pathway, and that will help determine what time it is in the brain. So it resets that rhythm every single day.
It's so interesting that both environment and also genetics play a big part in our sleep timing. And in regards to this sleep timing, can you explain why it actually matters?
matters for
sleep timing, why it matters for cognition, for performance, for, all things functional human.
yeah, functional to be a functional human. Why is it important? So I spoke a little bit during the last question about how our circadian rhythms, it thrives off predictability. So if it can predict what time to tell other clocks, sorry, probably should go into this a bit more. So when I speak about our circadian rhythm, I'm speaking about our central clock, and that's located in this more long words, I'm sorry. Suprachiasmatic nucleus, that's in the hypothalamus in the brain. It's a really, really small region. Its sole purpose is to actually regulate our circadian systems and to actually give signals to the other clocks in the brain. So it's about 20,000, no, there are other clocks in the body. So the actual brain region itself, it's about 20,000 neurons. So it's not a lot of neurons, but they're highly interconnected. And how we might describe this in terms of an analogy is the circadian rhythm, so that central clock, is almost as if it's the conductor of an orchestra. So all of our cells in our body actually have other clocks. They're called peripheral clocks. So you've got a clock in the gut, the liver, you've got clocks in your muscles. And all of those clocks run on different rhythms. And this central clock actually helps coordinate and give cues to other clocks. So let's just say you were at the orchestra and you're in the violin section. That could be your gut. Sounds like it's working well. So the violins are all playing really nicely. And then you might go to the piano section. Sorry, I'm not a musical person. I don't know if pianos are right. Let's just say we're going to the piano session for the purposes of this analogy. And they're all working well. So they sound really good. But if you're in the audience and you don't have a strong conductor, something's going to sound a bit off. Right? They might be working well in silo, but in unison, they're not harmonizing well. And what can happen in, I guess, health perspectives, you can then have higher risk of psychiatric disorders, higher risk of getting infectious diseases. We know it affects cognition. You have a higher risk of dementias, all cause mortality, really. So if you have a clock that doesn't know how to tell the time, it's not going to be able to signal to the other clocks what to do at the right time. So it's not going to be able to tell the gut, hey, it's probably in about an hour, Ellie usually eats. So let's start getting the gut ready to eat. It's not going to be able to tell that to your other cells in your body either. So it just changes the physiology and it changes the signals. Same with sleep timing. So if I am sleeping, let's just say in between, if I am sleeping in between 6 o'clock in the afternoon to 12 o'clock at night. Oh, that sounds surreal to me. What a large variability. But yeah, if I'm just sleeping anywhere in between that time and I've got a large variability, my clock's really confused. It's going, I don't know when you want me to be doing what I need to do. So you have a weaker clock. And when you have a weaker clock, you have a whole number of other diseases and conditions that come alongside that. It's not saying that you can't do the thing, because you're still going to be able to function. The violins are still going to play, your pianos are still going to go, your trumpets are still going to be trumpeting, but it's just not going to be working well together. Like, the brain is a pattern detector. So let's just say, do a quick task. If I say 1, you say 2. Ready? 1,
2,
1,
2,
1,
2,
1,
2,
1,
2.
3. What do you do?
Pause.
Exactly. And that's exactly what's going to happen with your sleep. So even though, so there's a pattern, 1, 2. So let's just say 1 can be at 9 o'clock every afternoon, I am going to go to sleep. But then suddenly I try and go to sleep at 6 o'clock in the afternoon instead of 9. The brain can still get it done. We can still do it. It just is not very efficient. Whilst 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, there's a pattern. But other from that, in terms of how it might sleep regularity and sleep irregularity might affect mood. again, there's more aspects. So again, going back to the mechanisms, it can activate that HPA axis again that we spoke about with that release of cortisol, because that pathway is underlined by the circadian system. And if you have a dysregulated circadian system, you've got a dysregulated stress pathway where cortisol might be released in the evening instead of the morning. It can also, this is not my type of research, but it can also affect your microbiome in your gut. It can affect the actual microbiota, which I don't want to butcher this, but actually synthesize tryptophan, which is responsible for serotonin in the brain. So it can just dysregulate your gut as well, which can indirectly affect the brain. And there's all the other aspects of it as well. When you've got irregular timing, that can also lead to a number of mental health conditions. Let's go back to that bidirectional cycle, and that can just lead to more issues. So yeah, there's many different mechanisms in which we might see that effect.
So this timing is basically important for all-cause mortality.
Pretty much. There's been actually many studies on that have just shown that sleep regularity, independent of sleep duration, so independent of whether or not you're getting 8 hours of sleep, can affect you having a higher risk of psychiatric conditions as well as have a higher risk or cause mortality.
That's a pretty good reason to be consistent.
I think so. Well, you would think. It's harder than we say.
So I have, through podcasts, learned that about a 30-minute to an hour window is most optimal, which is not super realistic for everyone. But I try really hard to try and stick with like around a 30-minute window. Like, let's say I usually wake up at 5:30, like trying to stick between 5 and 6. So like 30 minutes each side. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
And like same with like going to bed, obviously.
That would be the ideal.
That would be
if we could all do that, that would be absolutely fabulous. I think that would cause a lot of issues. That would like remove a lot of issues in society and in healthcare. But unfortunately, not all of us can do that. So if you can do that, absolutely fabulous. If you can strive for maintaining an hour window on both sides or 30 minutes on either sides, that's actually what we did with our intervention. But what we know from many people's lives and societal expectations is there's so many barriers to actually being able to keep that regularity and keep that cycle throughout.
Yeah. So in practice, it would be do your best.
Do as best as you can, and if you are someone, so try and maintain regularity or a semblance of regularity. And this can be really hard for shift workers, where you're doing, especially people that work in medical professions. There's many other shift workers, but I'm saying this because I can resonate with medical professions and that's the field I work in. But a lot of time, especially nurses, they don't go from on their days off, they'll go back to doing their daytime schedule. So they don't actually keep to their nighttime schedule, which makes sense because they might want to go and see friends or go for a coffee on their days off. And they're not able to do that if they're keeping to their nighttime schedule where they should be awake at night. But if you can, in terms of optimizing your health, it's keep a semblance of regularity. If you're not able to do that, what might you do instead? We'll try and regulate your light. So indirectly, if you have good regularity, you're likely going to get good regular light. And if we're keeping, let's say the typical wake up in the morning, go to bed late evening, you are getting bright days and dark nights. If you're able to try and at least anchor your mornings with light, try and get as much light as you can, that can help reset the clock and that can actually help stabilize that wake. So that can stabilize your wake time. So maybe that nighttime is a little bit irregular, but at least you're stabilizing that wake time. You're resetting your clock and you're stabilizing one timing aspect.
Yeah, that is a really good, like, real life way of describing it because not everyone can stick with having that regular timing in terms of half an hour or even an hour each side.
Mm.
And we need the shift workers. So if you're a shift worker listening to this, thank you.
Yeah, well, they're doing God's work, really. It's carcinogenic, but they're doing God's work. Just the society we live in, modern urban environments, we've got light pollution
Yeah.
all around us, and there are probably some professions which don't need to be shift work and are still running, but there's definitely professions in which we need paramedics
Yeah.
in the middle of the
I was just
night.
thinking paramedics. Absolutely.
So, how are they? I guess their question would, or my question to them would be, is how can you keep as much of a predictable schedule as possible within the constraints and barriers of your work schedule?
Yeah. So, going to your research, can you tell us a little bit about the protocol you developed, what you did, what was involved, and what results you found?
Yes, the intervention. Last 3 years of my life, I have, alongside other research projects, have been developing this intervention, which is focused on timing, so sleep timing, as well as circadian alignment. So the whole premise was to try and get people to sleep as regularly as possible, but as well as is lined with their underlying circadian biology. We did this with semi-professional athletes, women especially, because we wanted to track other aspects of physiology over a season and
A sports
a
season.
sports season. Yeah. So we conducted the intervention so we trialed it out in preseason. And the reason for that is during their in season, a lot of athletes do a lot of traveling and they travel to different time zones. And it was a way to target them whilst they were on the same longitudinal, latitudinal uh,
Location.
coordinates. Yeah, and so we can control for a few things. Unfortunately, with real world research, there's a lot of things we can't control, and we just wanted to control as much as we could within those constraints. And the way we actually went about developing the interventions, all of our athletes wore a Whoop device, which is a biometric wearable, and we're able to track your sleep, rest activity patterns. And so they wore that 24 hours of the day, or they were supposed to. And then each day they would fill out some journal items, which was subjective light exposure. It was also how they were feeling each day. We also tracked menstrual cycle and other physiological variables as well. And some of the athletes got given light glasses if we needed them to sleep a little bit earlier than what they were used to, because we're trying to get their body, their sleep behaviors in line with their body. So we would give them light in the morning. And in Melbourne, I guess compared to Queensland, if you're trying to wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning, and it's usually not going to be light. So we would need to give them light therapy devices in order to try and advance their sleep timing. And then in the afternoons, everyone got given blue light blocking glasses. And that was just to reduce the effects. I mean, when you're seeing a screen in the afternoon, it's probably only 40 lux in front of you, but it was just reduce like light exposure as much as possible, even amber lighting in your living room. I think some people's bathrooms can be up to 300 lux of light, and that can have an impact. So trying to standardize some aspects, and then every athlete got a behavioral coach, so someone who is going to be with them throughout the 4-week intervention. And the behavioral coach, all of these other stuff was really about just getting them to do the damn thing. And to do the damn thing was regular phase line schedules. And then we looked at their sleep over that intervention period compared to the baseline. So we tracked them for 3 weeks beforehand. We also measured their circadian clocks, and the way we did that is we measured their melatonin, and there's a protocol we used where we put them in dim light over a number of hours in the evening. It's quite wacky. We all had like these funny glasses because we had to block out all the light, and we were on Zoom. And what we can do is we can see when your melatonin peaks, and in dim light, your melatonin peak is going to be a bit of a look into what the brain's timing is. And then we were able to actually create the phase-aligned schedules because we know when their body peaks, we know what time they're usually going to bed and waking up. That's how we created the schedules. And yeah, so what we found really, really interesting. It took me a long time to actually wrap my head around some of the results and the findings. But overall, so many aspects of sleep improved, which was so great. That's what you want to see, these massive, large effects as well. Um, we increased total sleep time by 20 minutes, but we didn't increase their sleep opportunity. So their time in bed stayed the same, but their sleep increased. And that basically just means that their sleep is more efficient. Their sleep, when you go into bed, you're actually going to sleep quicker, rather than just lying in bed and not sleeping. Their awakenings at night decreased. So these are all significant results. Their awake after sleep onset decreased. So yeah, I was looking at all these results going, absolutely fabulous. This is what you want to see when you develop an intervention. But the main target was this sleep regularity aspect, and that didn't change. So I kind of had to think and went, all right, all of these sleep variables are changing. Mental health didn't change, given it was only 4 weeks. It was pre to post. And we know mental health is relatively stable in terms of like mood can be much more fluctuating and transient, but mental health is a little bit more of a stable aspect. And maybe they weren't of clinical significance, and it's quite a small sample size, and maybe that's why we didn't change. But I'm going, why isn't regularity changing? The whole premise around the intervention is regularity. And there's a lot of barriers around regularity in terms of society, and these athletes, they were also working, they were studying. We know college students or uni students have probably one of the have extremely high irregularity because they're usually juggling academic demands as well as work demands. I remember when I was doing an undergrad, I was also working in a bar till 3 a.m. in the mornings, Friday to Sunday. And then I would go back to my 8 a.m. uni schedule
That's
during the
nuts.
weekday. Some of them were training, so they trained late on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then on the weekends, they would have competitions, so they'd have to wake up early. So there was a lot of barriers to them sleeping regularly. However, we did a sub-analysis that looked at what we could see people who tried to sleep regularly. So tried to sleep within 1 hour of their mid-sleep. So that's between when they go to bed and when they wake up. And we compared that to people who were super irregular. And then we noticed these mental health changes. So people who tried to sleep regularly during that intervention period actually improved mental health. So we looked at a number of different mental health measurements, and all of these improved significantly. However, the irregular sleepers, some of them even got worse in terms of their mental health. So it is a subgroup analysis. It's on a moderation. I can't say whether or not regularity is the actual effect because there was a lot more going on during the intervention. However, it is really interesting that even within a month, we're seeing these changes. And over the sport season, the academic season, what we know from the research is irregularity gets worse, mental health gets worse as pressures increase, stress increases as well. So maybe it is protective and buffer, this intervention. But I think it taught me an important point that regularity is hard. It's not easy, especially when there are barriers outside of your control. So maybe those that were irregular, they were really engaged in the intervention. They attended all the behavioral coaching sessions. Their sleep improved, but structures around them maybe stop them from being irregular. So society and contextual factors were just barriers to them being regular. But it doesn't mean that your sleep can't improve, even though you're irregular.
So you tested all females, am I right? Was that?
Yeah.
Or was it, okay, all females?
Yeah, an all-female team. yeah, that's what we wanted to first look at. We wanted females are so understudied in sports science
I
research. So
agree, yeah.
rather than starting with a male team, we just went, we're going to start with a female
They
team.
are more challenging. We are more challenging.
We are, but we aren't. I would say adherence is probably much higher in females. We've got unique physiologies that are important to study as well, and how that might affect sleep. So I've got other people in the lab who focus mainly on like the female aspect physiology and how that might impact sleep, and how menstrual cycle
Yeah.
might also play into that, where there will be findings soon. But that's still under data analysis. But it was really great working with a female team, I would say, because they were so engaged and they were really happy that they got given this opportunity, and there was a lot of gratitude towards that. But obviously with females especially, we did work in the AFL. Female teams are not getting paid enough in that environment to have that as a full-time job. So they usually have another job alongside working as a professional athlete. And
Yeah.
that's where the barrier is coming.
And I suppose, like, I know that your research wasn't specifically looking into this, but with women, typically, we're more challenging to study due to the menstrual cycle. Like, this
I think that's just an
infuriating.
excuse. That's been the excuse they've used since the 90s. I would not say we're more challenging. I just think there's maybe more thinking involved. We just need to think bigger.
I like it.
Yeah.
It's like a different reframe.
Yeah.
Well, if you could have every person listening implement just one change from your research that would meaningfully improve their mental health and well-being, what would that be?
One thing.
Okay, it doesn't have to be just one thing.
One thing. Going back, number one, try and keep a semblance of regularity or predictability. Our brain thrives off predictability. Can we try and maintain that and keep that? Second, if you're not able to maintain a semblance of regularity, can you get bright days and dark nights? I think what a lot of people know about is, whoever has experience within circadian rhythms, is we know that morning light resets the circadian clock. And morning light is great. It's great to get morning light. We feel more alert. We've reset the clock, ready to get on with our day. But actually, light throughout the day is also equally as important. So the more light you get throughout the day, it can have a protective effect on light at night. So you don't need to be wearing your blue light blocking glasses at night or worrying about your screens. It's almost going to be not really relevant if you're getting lots of light during the day. So it has a buffering effect.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating, because if we think about it, again, those cells in our eyes, they're pretty much photon counters. So they count the amount of lux of light. Something like the sun, for example, on a bright sunny day, we can get up to 100,000 lux of light. So even on a cloudy day, that's still tens of thousands of lux of light. And it's all relative. So if you're getting hundreds of thousands of lux of light during the day, and then in the evening, it doesn't matter if you're scrolling on your phone for an hour or 2 hours, that phone is only emitting 40 to 100 lux of light. And compared to 100,000 of lux of light you got during the day, it's going to be insignificant.
Wow.
However, there is another aspect of phones which is important to mention, which is its addictive effect. Phones, what you're doing on screens, whether it's computers, watching television, that is going to be entertainment, and that might be keeping you awake. So it's not necessarily the light that's keeping you awake, it's entertainment. So it's another aspect of it. But if you can get as much light as you can during the day, I wouldn't be too worried about the light you're getting from the living room, your bathroom, or your bedroom at night.
Interesting, because I always, if I have to shower late because I've had a shift that ends late, or shower like in the dark because I'm like, if I have the light on, I'm not going to be able to go to sleep. And it is very calming. Like I still have like a light on outside and the door a little bit open so I can
Mm.
see what I'm doing. But it's good to know that I don't have to do
Well,
that,
there's a different
even though it does
purpose.
help.
Yeah, there's a different purpose to it. So
Yeah.
there's a calming effect
Yeah.
to that ritual. So it becomes a nighttime routine. And that nighttime routine helps your body get ready for bed. So there's a different
Yeah.
purpose to it. But if you are someone who, you live in an environment where you don't get much sunlight during the day, then you want to do as much as possible as you can to reduce your evening light. So if you are in the
Yeah.
office all day, it's a really, really gloomy day. You maybe live in Northern Europe, for example, if there's any Northern European listeners here, and you don't really get a lot of light in the day, you want to be trying to reduce the amount of light you have during the evening because you've maybe been in an office room that's, let's just say, a couple hundred lux of light. You go to your bedroom, you go to your bathroom, that's another couple hundred lux of light. So your brain has no way of deciphering what's daytime and what's nighttime because it's the same amount of photons throughout the whole 24-hour period. Well, not the whole 24-hour, but throughout when you're supposed to be awake and when you're supposed to be getting ready for sleep. Again, evolutionary perspective, let's think like millions of years ago, we didn't have artificial lighting. Something like a candle, you being in your candle and having your bath, your romantic bath, that's less than 1 lux of light. So just the differentiation between the dark and our day, there just has to be a relative difference.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I also think the shower helps because like I always have a shower just before bed at night, and like the warmth of the shower
Mm.
and like heats the body, and then the body goes to cool, and then that like cooling effect thereafter is also like supportive of sleep onset, and
Mm-hmm.
and I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah, it's great.
It's a great ritual.
Love a warm shower. Yeah. Well, the body does need to drop a degree to get ready for sleep. So, yeah, whatever you can do. So, your whole nighttime routine, whether it's this 20-step routine, a 10-step routine, your whole nighttime routine is basically, again, just getting you to do the damn thing, which
Yeah.
is sleep. And unfortunately, with sleep, like unlike the other foundations of health, if we think about exercise, the harder we work out, the more strong we get. Sleep, it's not like that. Sleep, the harder we work at it, the worse it becomes sometimes. The more we think about it, the harder it is to engage in it and get into it. Going back to what I said, the very initial step, at the start, we were born to sleep. So allow yourself to actually just get into that space. And whether it is 20-step, 1-step routine, we're all different. We're all individual. There is no one size fits all. Base it off your body's needs, and everyone should be getting sleep hygiene. So it's just like we brush our teeth every day, you should be doing the things during the day to get you ready for sleep. That's non-negotiable across everyone. But everything else is just an add-on.
Yeah. Can we briefly dive into sleep hygiene? Because I like obviously have clean bedding, like have a shower, all of the things, like actually cleanliness.
Mm.
But I think a lot of people think that's all sleep hygiene is. Do you want to dive a little bit into like what it actually means?
Yeah. It's sleep hygiene, simply put, is, I would say, how I might define it is the behaviors you do during the day or into the evening that will get you ready or get you set up for good quality sleep. That can encompass a range of different aspects. So that can encompass napping. So napping too late in the evening, that can affect your sleep at night. Having caffeine. So caffeine stays in your system. Caffeine acts as an adenosine antagonist. So it acts on the receptors of adenosine, which was that sleep pressure build up in the day. and that stops you from feeling tired. And that can stay in our system. And yes, some people metabolize caffeine a lot quicker, but there is a half-life. And whoever says that they can drink a cup of coffee right after bed, I mean, right after dinner and still fall asleep really quickly, maybe you've got an amazing fast metabolism, but it's still going to have an effect on your sleep. And some people are super sensitive to caffeine, where even an 8 to 10 hour gap between when they're going to go to bed and when they last have their last cup of coffee is still too short. So there is individual differences. Other aspects of sleep hygiene. Is it about getting the bedroom ready, having your co-bath? It's all individual. It's what behaviors you need to get yourself set up to have good quality sleep in the evening. And some of that might involve actually what you perceive your bed as. So
Interesting.
so good sleep hygiene involves your bed just being used for sleep and sex. That's it. If you use your bed, which a lot of us do, for scrolling, for like being on the computer, for just kind of lying around, maybe reading even, or even doing our relaxation techniques in the bed, what's going to happen is your brain associates bed with more than just sleep. It associates bed with states of arousal, states of emotional reactivity. And your brain learns by patterns. So if I'm on Instagram and I'm on Reels and I get really aggravated by these Reels, I've got that feeling of aggravation in my bed. And my brain is going to learn to associate that bed is not just sleep, bed's also so many other things. So for people who struggle with getting to sleep, that is just one way they can utilize bed.
Really allocating the bed for just, sleep and sex and, not having breakfast in bed.
No, not having breakfast in bed, getting out straight away. So when you wake up in the morning,
Yeah.
instead of lingering around in bed, you get
Just
out straight
go.
away.
Yeah. It does
It's
make it
called
a lot
stimulus
easier.
control. Yes, a lot easier.
Are there any other factors that would impact sleep? Alcohol is one that comes to mind. Do you want to dive a little bit into that? And anything else that you think we haven't yet touched on that would impact sleep, sleep quality, meaning like, timing, depth, etc.
Yeah, geez. It's probably lots of different things that I could go into what might affect sleep quality. But for alcohol is just bad for sleep. Just to put it simply, yes, it's much easier to get into sleep, so it's much easier to fall asleep, which is what a lot of people utilize alcohol for as like a therapeutic modality. Okay, I'll have a glass of wine and then I'm going to fall quicker to sleep. Maybe that's to do with turning off the mind. There's a lot of psychological issues that might come up, and it's a way to dampen that. So what is the function of alcohol doing for you? But we know that once the body metabolizes this alcohol, it can affect your later cycles of sleep. And then you have really fragmented, poor sleep quality in the earlier mornings, so the later stages of sleep. If you drink alcohol in the afternoon, so sometimes when you go, like sunset wine with the girls, you just want to make sure that when your body is trying to metabolize the alcohol, you're not trying to fall asleep, because then you're going to have trouble falling asleep. But it's a give and take. It's a give and take, right? If it's one night, like every couple weeks, and you're socializing and there's a function for it and it's a healthy function, that's fine. But if you're utilizing it as a sleep aid, it's probably not doing the job you want it to do. And if it is an issue, you need to kind of get down to what your sleep issue is. So everyone's got an individual sleep issue. Are you waking up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, or you feel like you're getting your 8 hours of sleep, but you're waking up and you're just not refreshed? Are you snoring? It doesn't have to be snoring, but what's going on there? It could be a sleep apnea. And then all of these other techniques are not going to be helpful, or they will be helpful for the sleep hygiene side of things, but they're not targeting the underlying problem. The underlying problem is you've got sleep apnea, and you probably need to go and get yourself tested, because there are therapies that target sleep apnea that are very effective?
Mm.
Or is it a
Yeah.
physiological issue where you need to calm your physiology down? That's going to be very different to a psychological concern, which a lot of people have. Um, it's that feeling of my mind is racing before I try and get to bed.
That's very common.
Very, very common. Or when you wake up in the middle of the night and you struggle to get back to sleep because your mind is racing. What you do and the strategies you implement are going to be very different to the next person.
Do you have any strategies that you've learned for specifically that mind racing before bed?
Yeah. Well, going back to stimulus control, that's really useful. So it's telling your brain, okay, bed is not for to spiral. Bed is for sleep. Patterns. Your brain is just a pattern detector. It's so efficient. It just recognizes patterns, and that's how it gets us through the world. But also other techniques, if you are spiraling, maybe get out of bed. Get out of bed, go lie on the couch. Some people journal, find that helpful, write down their thoughts. That's also where this nighttime routine, 20-step routine that people do come in. Maybe it's your bath and your candle. It's going, okay, I'm going to, let's just say, turn off my phone at a certain time, turn off Netflix at a certain time. What do I need to put in place in between me shutting off my devices and going to bed to put me in a state where I'm not aroused? So I know that if I do work until late into the evening, I'm going to think about it. So I need to be making sure that whatever I'm consuming late in the evening, that if there was an alarm that went off randomly and that was for me to shut it off immediately, I could do that. If you're engaging in content where if your alarm goes off and you go, oh no, I must read the next chapter of that book is too good, or I must know what the ending of this TV show will be, or I'm going to have to scroll for another 30 reels because I need to know what the bottom of this influencer drama is. Then you're engaging in the wrong content. You're engaging in content that is causing emotional reactivity. So what content can you engage in where it's just not that? It's calming your brain down, because some people need content to calm their brain down from the day, but it's not engaging enough that you can't just shut it off when you want to. So yeah, that's another way you can kind of think about how you might turn your brain off or calm your brain down to get ready for sleep. And if it is an issue and you are experiencing this for more than 3 days, and it's causing you a week, and it's been over a period of 3 months, then you might have an insomnia, and I would say you need to go to a sleep specialist or a psychologist. There's very, very effective treatments for insomnia. CBTI, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. It's highly effective in treating insomnia, and it uses some of the techniques we speak about, but you are working with a highly trained professional.
And it's more individualized, right?
Yes, very individualized. I mean, all of these strategies should be individualized. I shouldn't be using the same strategies as you because we have different biologies, different sleep needs. We need to figure out what works for us. But yes, it is having someone with you to help guide you through these strategies, because there's going to be barriers, and how do you work through those barriers? That the sleep physician, sleep psychologist, usually who do behavioral interventions, they will help guide you through these issues. So yeah, so if it's causing you impairment and issues with functioning and it's been for quite a period of time, then I definitely would say that you need to go and get yourself checked up. But life throws us bad hands. We have a stressful week at work, and we might have a couple of bad nights of sleep. And it's also allowing for that. Your body is highly adaptable. Yes, it's going to cause reductions in performance, but we're able to bounce back. So we can adapt to a few nights of bad sleep and still be fine the next week. This is when we speak about all of these conditions and diseases and these really morbid ideas of, oh my God, you're going to get dementia and you're going to have all of these psychiatric conditions. That's over the long term. So that's a chronic sleep deprivation, sleep loss, low sleep quality over a number of months. That's not 1 week. It's been really stressful. Maybe I've broken up with my partner and I'm going through this natural period of grief and it's keeping me up. I'm thinking about, what I could have done, what I should have done. Keep to your schedule, keep to your routine. Don't go out of whack with your routine. And eventually you're going to get back into the sync of things.
Yeah. It's that timing, right? And all the signals and like honoring yourself in where you're at, like from external factors, your lifestyle. Is there anything that we haven't talked about today that we potentially should have?
Yeah, I think we touched on a lot of different components, but I really do want to just, I guess, emphasize on the fact that one size doesn't fit all, and we are all unique human beings with different needs, different genetics, different environmental contexts. So I actually, before this last night, I was on Instagram Reels. Terrible, I know, before bed. But I got a lot of light during the day, so I was protected. And when my alarm went off, I put it down and I saw a reel that said, "Oh, I went from being a night owl to a morning person, and I now wake up at 4:30 every morning, and I am so efficient, and this changed my life." And I think by making an arbitrary comment like that, yes, there's a lot of benefits to waking up. I mean, Aristotle even, this is a philosopher back in the day, I think he said, like, waking up before dawn, like, helps with health, wealth, and wisdom. And society is biased towards morning intermediate types. Our usual work day starts at 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. School days start at 8 o'clock, which means you should be getting up at 6 o'clock. And it's not really fair to the evening types of the world or the night owls, where if they get up at 5 a.m. in the morning, it's really hard for them. It's not easy going to the gym, even if they're getting light in the morning. Yes, they can maybe advance their clock a little bit, but what's going to happen is they're not going to get the sleep they need in the evening because they're going to bed before their melatonin rises. They're not getting very good sleep. Their sleep's not very consolidated. And then it almost is a dysfunction to this subgroup of people in the population, because it's saying that you're not enough, you don't work hard enough, you're not disciplined enough, you're not motivated enough. And that, alongside other factors, can cause a number of mental health conditions. It makes you feel like shit. I'm not motivated enough to wake up at 4:30 in the morning, because when I wake up at that time, I feel absolutely sick. I feel sick to my stomach. I feel like I can't function. I definitely cannot lift a 50-kilo bar for squats. Absolutely not. So just be aware that you are an individual person and not everything you see on social media, don't take it as face value. Follow your biology, follow your unique rhythms, and hopefully then you feel better.
This has been such an incredible conversation. I've learned so much, and I'm sure that everyone listening has learned so much as well. And I really appreciate your time and everything you're doing. It's so cool. Definitely would love for you to come back on and learn about everything else you're doing, because you're doing so much more than just sleep. And yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, this has been fun. Love talking about my sleep.
Thank you for tuning in to Elevate Wellness with Santosha. I appreciate you listening, and I hope this episode helped you take one small step towards feeling and performing better.